My Twisted World, The Story of Elliot Rodger by Elliot Rodger. Humanity. All of my suffering on this world has been at the hands of humanity, particularly women. It has made me realize how brutal and twisted humanity is as a species. All I ever wanted was to fit in and live a happy life amongst humanity. But I was cast out and rejected, forced to endure a existence of loneliness and insignificance, all because the females of the human species were incapable of seeing the value in me. This is the story of how I, Elliot Rodger, came to be. This is the story of my entire life. It is a dark story of sadness, anger, and hatred. It is a story against cruel injustice. In this magnificent story, I will disclose every single detail about my life, every single significant experience that I have pulled from my superior memory, as well as how those experiences have shaped my views of the world. This tragedy did not have to happen. I didn't want things to turn out this way, but humanity forced my hand, and this story will explain why. My life didn't start off dark and twisted. I started out as a happy and blissful child, living my life to the fullest in a world I thought was good and pure. Part 1, A Blissful Beginning, age 0 through 5. On the morning of July 24th, 1991, in a London hospital, I was born. I breathed my first breath of life as I entered this world, weighing only 5.4 pounds. My parents must have been filled with happiness and pride that day. They had just witnessed the birth of their child, and they named me Elliot Oliver Robertson Rodger. I was born to young parents. My father was only 26 when he impregnated my mother, who was 30. My father, Peter Rodger, is of British descent, hailing from the prestigious Rodger family, a family that was once part of the wealthy upper class before they lost all of their fortune during the Great Depression. My father's father, George Rodger, was a renowned photojournalist who had taken famous photos during the Second World War, though he failed to require the family's lost fortune. My mother is of Chinese descent. Li Chin was born in Malaysia and moved to England at a young age to work as a nurse on several film sets, where she became friends with very important individuals in the film industry, including George Lucas and Steven Spielberg. She even dated George Lucas for a short period of time. My mother and father had been married for a couple years before my mother became pregnant with me. In fact, her pregnancy was on an accident. She had been taking pills to prevent the pregnancy, but when she visited my father on one of his film sets, she fell ill and the medication she took for that illness thwarted the effect of the anti-pregnancy pills. So their lovemaking during this period resulted in my life. Only a couple months after my birth, I went on my first vacation. My parents took me on a boat to France. I was already a traveler. Of course, I have no memories of this trip. My mother said I cried a lot. At the time I was born, my mother and father were living in a house in London, but shortly after my birth, they decided to move to the countryside. We moved to a large house made of red brick in the county of Sussex, with vast grass fields surrounding it. The house even had a name, the Old Rectory. This is where I spent my early childhood, the first 5 years of my life, and it was beautiful. The memories I have of this period are only memories of happiness and bliss. My father was a professional photographer at this time, just in the stage of becoming a director. My mother gave up on her nursing career to stay at home and look after me. My grandmother on my mother's side, who I would call Amma, moved in with us to help out my mother. I would spend a lot of time with Amma during these years. This was a time of discovery, excitement, and fun. I had just entered this new world, and I knew nothing of the pain it would bring me later on. I enjoyed life with innocent bliss. I can remember playing in the fields and going on lawn walks with Amma to pick berries. She would always warn me not to touch the stinging needles that grew in the fields, but my curiosity got the better of me, and I got stung a few times. There was also a swing in the back of our yard, which I had many good times on. The first birthday I remember was my third birthday. My parents threw a party for me in our field. I had a helicopter birthday cake. I can remember one of my friends cutting off the first piece and giving it to my friend. I threw a tantrum because I was expecting to get the first piece. It was my birthday after all. My father brought me a toy tractor that I could ride in, and I would play with it all the time after that. Sometime after my third birthday, we all went on a vacation to Malaysia, my mother's home country. I have only flashes of memory of that vacation. I enjoyed it very much. We visited a few of my mother's relatives. For preschool, I was enrolled at Dorset House, an upscale, all-boys private school on the countryside, near where we lived. I was forced to wear a uniform, which I hated because I have to wear uncomfortable socks up to my knees. I was very nervous and I cried on my first day there. I can remember two friends I made, George and David, who I would always play in the sandpit with. I didn't like Dorset House very much. I found the rules to be too strict, and my least favorite part of it was the football sessions. I never understood the game and I could never keep up with the other boys in the field. So I always stood by the goalkeeper and pretended to be the second goalkeeper. My favorite part about this was playing in the woods after lunch. There was a particular climbing structure that I had a lot of fun with. My preschool class once went on a field trip to the park, where I had the misfortune of getting lost. As my class was eating lunch, I ventured off to another area of the park, and when I returned, my class had moved on. I remember panicking and asking strangers for help. This was a terrifying experience for me. I was eventually led to my class by the strangers I talked to. I remember one funny incident where we were taking school pictures. They forced us to sit cross-legged, which I hated doing, so I absolutely refused to sit that way for the picture. The teachers eventually conceded, and the picture was taken with me being the only one in the class sitting differently. The holiday season was the best part of the year for me. It must have been very cold in England, but I don't remember the cold. I just remember how much fun I had. I was filled with joy when it started snowing outside. I loved the snow. My father helped me build a snowman once. We would start playing with little snowballs and roll them around our field until we formed the body, and then we would decorate it. During Christmas, my parents always had parties and gatherings. My father's best friend, Christopher Bess, who I would also call my godfather, came to our house frequently. He would go visit my father's parents' house in Smarden, Kent. I would call my grandmother on my father's side Grandma Jinx. My memories of my grandfather, George Roger, are faint. He had fallen very ill at this period. My father's brother, Uncle Johnny, had a son 1 year younger than me, who was named George, after my grandfather. I always remembered playing games with cousin George in Grandma Jinx's garden. The two of us got along well. On New Year's Eve, our neighbors set up a bonfire party in the field next to our house. I was fascinated by how big the fire was. I had never seen anything like it. It astounded my little mind. This was also the first time I saw fireworks. My father gave me one of the sparklers to play with, which I was enraptured by. There was one very special place that my father would take me to. It was a range at the top of the rolling hills that I called the London Hills, because I thought that London was on the other side of them. We would go there to fly kites. I can remember these experiences vividly. The hills were full of straw-like grass, and the weather was always windy. Perfect for kite flying. It was a time of utmost happiness and joy for me. My father taught me how to fly a kite by myself. The wind was so strong that I feared it would lift up my frail little body and carry me into the clouds. Once I got the hang of it, it was exhilarating. We would fly our kites together and run with the wind. I will never forget that experience. My favorite childhood movie during this time was The Land Before Time. I used to watch that movie all the time with Amma. It was about a baby dinosaur named Littlefoot, who had just lost his mother and was journeying through a dangerous world to find the, quote, Great Valley, a land of prosperity and peace. I remember the feeling of utter sadness I felt when his mother died, and the triumph and happy emotions that swept over me when he finally discovered the Great Valley, after going through all the hardship to get there. I watched this movie so many times that just thinking about it brings all the good memories back. It was a big part of my childhood. Already a world traveler, I went on a trip to Spain with my parents and my parents' friends Patrick and Lupe. It was the fourth country I've been to at such a young age. We stayed in a exquisite castle-like house that I believed was owned by a friend of ours. The house had a tower that I was extremely curious about. At one point, my parents and their friends ventured up to the top of it, but they made me stay because I was too young. I was sorely disappointed. As they were climbing the tower, I went outside to look at the cacti surrounding the house. These cacti also sparked my curiosity, and I foolishly decided to touch a cactus. I ended up getting cactus needles around all over my hand, and it took a long time for my mother to remove them. Shortly after my trip to Spain, we went on a trip to Greece. We stayed in a hotel near the beach. It was very hot there. The weather was new to me, as I was used to the cold British climate. The trip to Greece was significant because during this time, my father received the news of the death of my grandfather, George Roger. He died of natural causes on my fourth birthday, at the age of 87. It was my first experience I had of a death of a close relative, and the first time I saw my father cry. My 4-year-old self cannot imagine my father ever crying, and so when I saw him cry that day, I knew how shaken he was. It was a very sad day for all of us. We immediately flew home. I believe that it was during my fourth birthday that my father came to the decision to eventually move to the US. As he was just becoming a director, he moved to Los Angeles in search of better opportunities. We took a short trip to California to gain an initial look at it. I don't remember much of this trip, but I do remember having a good time. At the age of 4, Elliot Rodger, had already been to 6 different countries. Who could claim that, eh? The United Kingdom, France, Spain, Greece, Malaysia, and the United States. It was also during this time that my mother became pregnant again. I was going to have a sibling. My parents decided to have another baby. This pregnancy was being planned so I could have a sibling to grow up with. We later discovered that it was going to be a girl. Before my 5th birthday, my mother went into labor to deliver the baby. I can remember the night vividly. I was very ill that night, a bad omen. I stayed at home with Amma while my mother and father were at the hospital, and we watched movies together. I was fraught with anticipation the whole time. And my parents came back late in the night, and with them they brought back a little black-haired baby wrapped in a bundle. I had a baby sister, and they named her Georgia. I have no memories of what happened on my 5th birthday. Shortly after it, we were taking plans to permanently move to the United States. This news excited me, but I was sad at the prospect of leaving my life in England behind. My father took a short trip to the US by himself to scout out for houses. I also remember talking to him on the phone while he was there. He told me that he found a very nice house for us to move to. I asked him if it had a swimming pool, and he said it did. This news made me very happy. And then the time came. We started packing everything up at the old rectory. On my last day at the Dorset House School, my teacher was going to give us all candies when my mother came to pick me up early. I said goodbye to all the friends I had there. That was the last time I ever saw them. My father was given the offer to buy the old rectory for about £400,000. We were only renting it at the time, but he declined, a decision he would regret later on, as it would have been a worthy investment. I cried as we drove away from the old rectory. All the memories I had there, playing in the fields, driving my toy tractor, tending to my garden, going on walks with Amma, swinging on the swing, all those experiences were gone. I was about to start a new life. We boarded on the plane and took off to America. Part 2, Growing Up in America, ages 5 through 9. The plane ride was like a dimension between worlds. I was about to enter a whole new world, a whole new life. But none of that went through my 5-year-old head at the time. I slept for most of the journey there, and I can remember looking out the window at the vast stretch of clouds below us. I wondered what it would look like to go down and run along them as if I were a landmass, not thinking about the fact that I would fall right through. When we arrived at America, I was very tired. We collected our luggage and loaded them into a new SUV that my father had just rented. The image of us driving out of the airport is still fresh in my mind. I often think of it as my first step into my new life in the US. I was so sleepy that when we reached our new house, I didn't even bother to look around. The house was partly unfurnished, and we already had a new sofa and television. The first thing we did was watch a movie. The movie was Independence Day, and I fell asleep at some parts, but managed to watch most of the movie. In the early morning, I was full of energy. I eagerly clambered up the stairs in search of my new room. I looked at all the rooms before singling out the one I wanted as mine. When I told my mother about this decision, she told me that the room that I picked was meant to be for my sister Georgia. I got a bit upset, but I eventually settled for the room adjacent to it. The house was quite big, with white walls and a beautiful backyard that led to a gated swimming pool area. It was in a part of upscale Woodland Hills, California. The town of Woodland Hills had a great significance in my life. It would be the town where I grew up. A large portion of my life experiences, good or bad, would take place in this town. I can recall for the first time the name on my lips, Woodland Hills, my new hometown. Soon after settling into our lovely new home, we were disturbed by a problem typical of California, an earthquake. My mother woke me up in the middle of the night and we all hid under the kitchen table. The earthquake was actually quite small, and even smaller aftershocks followed it, but I was still scared. Having never experienced an earthquake before, the only impression that I had of earthquakes were that they were huge, land-rupturing earthquakes that I saw in the land before time. After this experience, I began to see earthquakes as common minor disturbances. And there I was, a young 5-year-old boy who has so far lived a happy and joyful life, about to embark on a new journey. The journey of growing up in the United States of America. I felt a surge of enthusiasm at the prospect. I can now consider myself an American kid, I told my parents. I got accustomed to all the American TV shows and started to adopt an American accent. I was looking forward to my new life. Soon enough, I was enrolled in school. My father did some extensive school searching after our arrival, and he found a small private school on the Show Up Avenue named Pinecrest. I was to attend kindergarten there. Pinecrest, my 5-year-old self at the time could not imagine how significant this place would become for me. A great turning point in my life will eventually take place here. A tragic turn for the worse. But that will come later, in a darker chapter of my story, when I enter my preteen years. For now, I was a kindergartner who was enjoying life to the fullest. Kindergarten at Pinecrest didn't turn out so well. I had a very unpleasant teacher who was impatient with how behind I was in my schoolwork. So I had to miss a couple months due to the move. During playtime, this teacher would keep me in the classroom to do extra work in order to catch up. My parents didn't like this teacher, and one of their friends recommended another school to me, a private school nearby named Farm School. It was named after a farm that was attached to it. After only a couple weeks at Pinecrest, my parents took me out of it, and I would not return again until I go there for middle school 6 years later. My first day at Farm School turned out to be a good start. I had 2 teachers. They made an effort to introduce me to the other kids. There was one particular boy named Joey, who they assigned to show me around. He was nice to me at first, but would soon turn out to be a rotten little prick who I'd always get into fights with. He became my greatest enemy at the school. The first real friend I made in the United States was a girl named Maddie Humphreys. Isn't that ironic? The first friend I made in the United States was a girl. She was the first female friend I've ever had, and she would be the last. Maddie and I started playing together at Farm School, and eventually my parents became very good friends with her parents. Maddie's father was the famous British musician Paul Humphreys, and her mother is named Maureen, although we would call her Mo. They had a very nice house in Hidden Hills. My families got together often to have barbecues and dinners. I was only a 5-year-old boy playing with a girl my own age like any other normal boy would do. I was enjoying life in a world that I loved. I was happy. completely oblivious to the fact that my future in this world would only turn to darkness and misery because of girls. This girl who was my friend, Maddie Humphreys, would eventually come to represent everything I hate and despise. Everything that is against me, and everything I am against. I was playing innocently with this girl, in a manner that all children play. We even took baths together. It was only this time in my life that I would see a girl my age naked. When I think about these experiences I had during my friendship with her, it makes me think ominously of the fact that all children, boys and girls, start out the same. We start out innocent, and we start out together. Only through experiences and circumstances of growing up do we drift apart, form allegiances, and face each other as enemies. That is when wars happen, and that is when the true nature of humanity rises to the surface. At this stage in my life, of course, my war hadn't started yet. I was enjoying my life without a care in the world, not knowing that all my joy is destined to turn to dust. My kindergarten year at farm school was filled with exciting, new experiences, all healthy for a growing boy. Oh, God, choked on my fucking spit. That's crazy. My kindergarten year at farm school was filled with happy, exciting new memories, all healthy for a growing boy. I had friends, play dates, and socialized with other boys at the school, despite getting into a lot of conflicts with Joey. I only got into trouble once, over a quarrel with another boy during playtime, and I was sent to the principal's office. Having never been in such trouble before, I recall being overcome with nervousness and fear, which caused me to cry for an hour. I especially enjoyed our arts and crafts time, and I loved it when our class would go on visits to the school's farm. After a bright and joyous school year, it was time to graduate. I was swelled with pride as I wore my graduation cap to the ceremony. I loved that school very much, and I was sad to leave it. Kindergarten was over, and I would soon enter elementary school. My 6th birthday soon followed. My parents arranged a Disney-themed birthday party at a play center that my mother had been taking me to frequently. I invited everyone from my farm school class and all the boys and girls except for Joey. I deliberately omitted Joey as an act of revenge for being mean to me throughout the year, and I felt a sense of satisfaction in doing so. The party was cheerful, and there was a man dressed as Merlin to host the festivities. I sat at the end of the table during my birthday meal, wearing my wizard hat. As a cake was presented to me, I felt only elation and glee as I took a breath in and blew out my candles. Life was good. 6 years old. My favorite part of the day during this jubilant period was our afternoon trips to the park, specifically Sarania Park. This park was beautiful and green, with concrete pathways cutting through the fields of grass and a fun playground for us kids to play in. I always took to playing on the slides, and would sometimes go on the swings, though my father had to push me. I remember getting jealous of other boys who were able to go on the swings themselves, and other boys who were even younger than me. It was the second time I had to realize my lack of physical capability. The first time I had such an inkling of my shortcomings were those disastrous football sessions at Dorset House. Eventually, my father got around to teaching me how to swing by myself, and after some practice, I was able to do it. After that, I would always soar up and down on the swing in the Sarania Park playground, well into the hour of twilight. I was very small and short-statured for my age. I never gave this much concern during my early childhood, but this fact fully dawned on me on the day my family took me to Universal Studios. At the time, I loved dinosaurs. I was fascinated by them. I had recently just watched the movie Jurassic Park, and I found out that there was a Jurassic Park theme park ride at Universal Studios. I couldn't wait to go on it. We queued up in the line and waited for an hour. When we reached the front, the park staff presented me with a measuring stick, and I didn't fit the requirements. I saw other boys my age admitted onto the ride, but I was denied because I was too short. The ride that I was so excited to enjoy at the theme park was forbidden to me. I immediately fell into a crying tantrum, and my mother had to comfort me. Being denied entry onto a simple amusement park ride due to my height may seem like only a small injustice, but it was big for me at the time. Little did I know, this injustice would be indeed very small compared to all the things that I would be denied in the future because of my height. We resorted to trying out the ET ride, which I was admitted to. I had a miserable time on this ride, however, because the dark atmosphere and the mechanically moving alien structures that lined the queuing area scared the hell out of me. By the time we got to the actual ride, I was crying in fright, but later calmed down as the ride turned out to be mild and relaxing towards the end. I always enjoyed my father's get-togethers with the Humphreys. These get-togethers only became a common occurrence in my life. Maddie became a very close friend of mine. She was the only friend from farm school who I continued to see after I graduated. They had a very large backyard area, and the two of us would go on adventures. She also grew up watching The Land Before Time, and we would watch the sequels together whenever they released a new one. Sometimes I went to her house, and she would have other female friends there, and I played with them too. I had no trouble interacting with girls my age, surprisingly. My 6-year-old self was playing with girls, unbeknownst to the horror and misery that the female gender would afflict upon me in my later life. In the present day, these girls would only treat me as the scum of the earth, but at the time, they were all equals. Such bitter irony. It was now time for me to start first grade. My parents enrolled me at Sarania Avenue Elementary School, which was just down the street from Sarania Park. I wouldn't remain at the school for long, however, because only weeks into my first grade year, my parents decided that they were going to move to Topanga. Most of the kids at Sarania Avenue School would end up going to Taft High School nearby, a place that will cause me great suffering in the future. Perhaps some of the kids in my Sarania class will end up turning into those who bully me at Taft. I don't remember any of those kids from my class there, so I'll never really know the answer to that. It's very disturbing to think about. I quite enjoyed my time at Sarania. My parents sometimes made me stay an hour after school. I believe this was because they figured it would help me make friends. I can remember this after school playtime being a positive experience. There were always games that I played with the other kids, and thus I was a bit frustrated when my parents told me they were going to transfer me to another school shortly after settling into Sarania. That frustration would soon cease, because the years that I would spend at Topanga Elementary would become some of the best years of my life, the last years of being a carefree child. I started my first grade at Topanga Elementary a couple weeks before we got prepared to move to Topanga. Topanga is a secluded mountainous community surrounding a canyon that runs through the Santa Monica Mountains, located in between the San Fernando Valley and the Pacific Coast Highway. We only passed through this community a few times, and we would take trips to the beach. It has a certain rugged beauty about it. On my first day of Topanga Elementary, I was very nervous. Since it was about a month after the first grade term started, I was going to be the quote new kid at the school. I remember nervousness taking over my body as my mother drove us up to the steep road that led to the school proper. My new class was just lining up to start the day as we walked into the main courtyard. My teacher, Miss Matsuyama, was very nice and understanding. My mother said goodbye and I got in line with the other students. The first kid I saw was a chubby boy named Bryce Jacobs, who was staring at me strangely. As we got into the class, Miss Matsuyama assigned one of the students to show me around and to help me adjust. This student happened to be none other than Philip Blozier. Philip was very mature for his age, and he was very nice to me on my first day. He became my first friend at Topanga Elementary. The day turned out to be one of great fun. Class time was not too boring, and we did some fun arts and crafts activities. For recess and lunch, there were 2 playgrounds, the upper and the lower. The first and second graders would go to the lower playground, and the third, fourth, and fifth graders would go to the upper. The lower playground was smaller, but it had some nice amenities, especially the sloping hill to the side of it, where I would enjoy running up and down and quote, kicking dust, a game I instantly created due to the amount of dust-like dirt that was on this hill. When my mother came to pick me up, I recall having so much fun that I didn't want to leave. That's a first. In the past, I was always eager to go home after spending hours in school. The drive to and from the school was a long one, or at least long for my 6-year-old self. My favorite part of the drive was the descent from Topanga into the valley. The view of the broad, extensive valley was breathtaking, as it opened up before us after clearing the hill. I would take that trip I would make that trip through the winding roads of Topanga Canyon every day for the next couple of weeks, before we moved to our new house. Sometimes my mother would pick me up, and sometimes my nanny would. I don't remember the name of this nanny, as she was only with us for a brief period of time. I loved this new house the moment I laid eyes on it. It was a beautiful, round, wooden house located up the road from Valley View Drive, in the better part of Topanga. It had 2 stories, a swimming pool, and a lovely deck that provided a lush view of the mountains. I instantly named it the Roundhouse. I was sad to leave our house in Woodland Hills, our first house in America. I would miss the good times I had there, playing with Maddie and my other friends, swimming in the pool, where I spent a lot of time enjoying the elations of a carefree childhood. Our new roundhouse in Topanga, however, turned out to be a worthy replacement. My room at the roundhouse was a bit smaller than my old one, but I remember it being very cozy. Shortly after we moved in, Amma came in to visit from England, and she baked our favorite peanut cookies. We had some very happy times during the beginnings of my life there. My father's new directing career was taking off quite well too, and he would go on to direct commercials for prestigious companies, leaving my mother and nanny to look after me. The only downside of this was my father's absence from my life. Despite this, I always looked up to him as a powerful and successful man. Adjusting to my new environment in Topanga was quite easy for me, especially since school was so much fun. I was now a Topanga kid. During recess at school, I started noticing this boy with slightly long blonde hair who enjoyed kicking dust. Before I met him, I always nicknamed him the King Arthur Kid, due to the regal look his hairstyle gave him. It was only a matter of time before our dust-kicking antics would collide with each other. We then teamed up and started playing the game together, and this was the start of a long and interesting friendship. This boy's name was James Ellis, and he would become my best friend for the next 14 years of my life. Sometimes, the two of us would join Philip Blozier and some other boys and play fun games like handball, war games, and tag. Soon enough, I would start having frequent playdates with James Ellis. His house was just down the street from mine. James's father was named Art, and his mother, Kim, became one of my mother's best friends. Christmas arrived early, and for my present I got my first video game console, a Nintendo 64. I had little knowledge of video games before this. I barely knew what they were. My father is the one who introduced me to them. With the Nintendo 64, my father brought the games Star Wars, Shadows of the Empire, and Turok: Dinosaur Hunter. I was fascinated by this new form of entertainment. My father and I would bond a lot over our video game sessions. Of course, while playing these video games, my innocent, happy life knew nothing of the significant role video games would play during a large portion of my life, and the sanctuary such games would eventually provide from the cruelties of this world. For now, they were just a form of entertainment, like any other hobby. Life was good at the Roundhouse, but soon enough I had to witness my mother and father get into a lot of arguments. I was too young at the time to know what they were arguing about, but I knew they were not getting along. It didn't concern me all that much, because every other aspect of my life was wonderful. I had playdates with James Ellis every week. Sometimes he would surprise me with a visit after school, as we lived so close by. I went over to Philip Blozier's house a few times as well. I met his younger brother, Jeffrey. The Bloziers also became good friends with my mother. They lived in a nice house up from our own, with a deck that provided an extraordinary view of the Topanga Mountains. At some point, I learned about the possibility that my parents could separate, no longer live together, divorce. This prospect baffled my little mind. I once sat down with my mother on our outside deck and asked her if she and her father would ever divorce. She told me it would never happen, and that I had nothing to worry about. I was relieved by that. Little did I know, such a thing would only happen within a few months' time. My first grade year ended splendidly. I made a few lasting friends, and I had a blast at Topanga Elementary. I always considered myself a good, well-behaved student, so I was a bit disappointed in the few times that I got in trouble. My class had a system to where if we did something wrong, we would change our color card from green to yellow, and then red if we did any more troublemaking. I thought I would never have to change my card, but I had to change it to yellow a few times for minor things. When first grade ended, I made the resolution that in second grade I would never be forced to change my card. After my last day of school, I was looking forward to a long summer break, my favorite time of the year. I was a bit dismayed when my parents made me attend summer camp. My father had to go away for work, and my mother needed some time to look after baby Georgia. Summer camp wasn't all bad. I had some fun. It consisted of kids from first and through fourth grade, and we played lots of games and watched movies.